Hi kindergartners, it's Miss Want here to do a read aloud with you today. Today we are going to read this book, Grace for President. Before we start, we're going to talk about a question, a word that we need to know, and what we're going to focus on today. So first let's talk about a question that might help us understand this book. The question is, what is a dream you have? And remember, a dream is a big idea that you want to try. Take a second to think about that. If you can, pause this video and talk to someone close to you about a dream that you have, a big idea that you would like to try. Great. A word we need to know for this book is election. Say that with me, election. Let's snap it. Election. Let's clap it. Election. Let's always count it. Election. 3 syllables in that word. An election is when people choose a leader for the city, for the state, or for the country. We're also going to focus on one thing today. We're going to focus on character traits for this main character, Grace. Character traits are the things we know about someone's heart and brain. So at the end, we're going to talk more about what we know about Grace's heart and brain. Before we get started, we're always going to notice on the cover. I noticed there is a person here. They have both of their fingers up, both of their hands up. They look like they're celebrating. I see confetti. I see lots of people who look like they're really excited or happy for this character. I know a couple things about Grace's identity. Grace identifies as a girl, she identifies as Black, and she identifies as a kid. This is called Grace for President. On Monday morning in September, Mrs. Barrington rolled out a big poster with all of the president's pictures on it. Grace Campbell could not believe her eyes. Where are the girls? That is a very good question, said Mrs. Barrington. The truth is, our country has never had a woman president. No girl president ever? Grace asked. No, I'm afraid not, said Mrs. Barrington. Grace sat at her desk and stewed. No girls? Who'd ever heard of such a crazy thing? Finally, she raised her hand. I'm noticing that it's important to Grace that girls are represented just as much as boys, and that's reminding me of Women's History Month. Yes, Grace? I've been thinking it over, and I'd like to be president. Well, I think that's a great idea, Grace, said Mrs. Barrington. In fact, we have our own election here at Woodrow Wilson Elementary. I know a couple things. One, I know the setting. I know they're at school because it said Woodrow Wilson Elementary. I know that's a school. I also heard our word election. We know that an election is when people choose their leader. So it sounds like they're going to choose a student to be their leader. The snickering in the room stopped. Grace smiled. Would anyone else like to run for president? Said Mrs. Barrington. Nobody raised their hand. Becoming president was going to be easy, Grace thought. The next day, Mrs. Barrington made an announcement. In the name of democracy, I have invited Mr. Waller's class to join our election. Their class has nominated Thomas Cobb to be their presidential candidate. Grace's heart sank. Thomas was the school's spelling bee champion. He always got first place in the science fair, and he was the captain of the soccer team. Becoming president wasn't going to be so easy after all, thought Grace. The teachers put the names of all the kids in a hat and said that on election day, they would each vote for who they wanted to be the president. Grace came up with a campaign slogan. Make history, vote Grace Campbell for president. Thomas came up with his own campaign slogan. Vote for Thomas Cobb, the best man for the job. A campaign is when the candidates try to convince people that they're the best person for the job. Grace listened to what issues were important to the students, and she made a list of campaign promises. She promised to make a peaceful school, a cleaner school, and better hot lunches. Thomas Thomas made up his own list of promises. Free tutoring, free soccer lessons, fish stick tacos every week. Grace made campaign posters and buttons. Thomas made posters and buttons too. Each week, the teacher set aside time for the candidates to meet with their constituents. It was becoming clear who kids were thinking they would vote for. Grace continued to campaign. At recess, she gave speeches. During lunch, she handed out free cupcakes. And after school, she held marches to talk about what she believed in. Even before the election, Grace made good on her promises. She joined the safety squad, she organized a school beautification committee, and she volunteered her time in the school cafeteria. In early November, Woodrow Wilson Elementary hosted a special Election Day assembly. Grace and Thomas took their places on stage as the school band began to play. Then, each student was asked to vote for the candidate that they thought should be president. Grace looked at the scoreboard. She and Thomas were tied. They had the same number of votes, and there was only one student left to vote. Thomas grinned. Grace felt sick. Sam walked up to the microphone. He looked at Thomas. He looked at Grace. He looked down at Grace's handmade flag. All eyes were on Sam. Finally, he cleared his throat. I would like to cast my vote for Grace Campbell. The gymnasium erupted in loud cheers. Mrs. Barrington approached the podium. With 270 votes, the winner is Grace Campbell. Thomas looked stunned. Grace hugged Sam. Why did you do that? She asked. Sam handed Grace his flag. Because, he said, I thought you were the best person for the job. The following week, students in Mrs. Barrington's class were preparing for their career day presentations. Grace volunteered to go first. She stood at the front of the room and glanced at the poster still hanging on the wall. My name is Grace Campbell, and when I grow up, I'm going to be President of the United States. This time, everyone believed that she would. There's no words on this last page, but the illustrator's making me think that Grace grew up and became the president, because I can see that she's an adult in this picture. Our good reader question today is, what were all of the things that Grace did to try to convince people to vote for her? You can take a second and think about that. And if you can, pause the video and talk to someone close to you about all the things that Grace did to make people vote for her. Great. Before we started, we talked about character traits, what we know about someone's heart and brain. Now we're going to talk about what we know about Grace's heart and brain. I'm going to give you two character traits, and today you're going to choose the one that you think makes most sense, based on the evidence from this book. The two options are reliable and curious. Reliable means that you know that someone's going to always do what they say they do. They're reliable if they always do exactly what they say they're going to do. The word curious is a word that we've learned before in Ada Twist's Scientist. Ada Twist was very curious because she had lots of questions about everything. She was always wondering lots of things. Curious means someone who's always wondering lots of things about everything. So your job today is to talk about whether you think Grace is curious or reliable. And a good reader is going to use evidence from the book that we just read. You could talk to someone about your answer, or you could write it down. Either way, you could send us a video or a picture of your work, and we would love to see it. Thank you for reading with me today.